I'd like to ask, what about the human mind would be interesting to an objective observer of our minds? Let's say, I always use the term a Martian anthropologist. I know that there are no anthropologists on Mars, at least Martian ones. And what I'm talking about is a cognitive anthropologist, so not interested in what we've done in terms of our impact or what we're able to do, but how we think, what goes on in our minds. What's objectively interesting about that or unusual compared to other organisms? And a lot of things have been proposed. Joe mentioned some of them. Some others are rationality, empathy, a sense of justice or fairness, and then the social learning that has extended so much or become so advanced in the human species to create an emergent property from the population level that we can call culture. And it's true that all of these things are extraordinary in humans, extraordinarily advanced in humans. And there's also a common recognition in our field, I would say, that they represent a quantitative difference from other organisms rather than a qualitative difference or a difference in kind, meaning that other organisms do a little bit of what we do to an extreme degree in all of these respects. But I also like the quote from Alfred North Whitehead, who said, "The distinction between men and animals is in a sense only a difference in degree, but the extent of the degree makes all of the difference. The Rubicon has been crossed." And for you youngsters, that's referring to Caesar coming across the Rubicon in Rome, and that being the point of no return, essentially, attacking his own capital city. And I like to think, instead of crossing Rubicon, I like to think of it as a neuronal action potential. So some of our evolutionary changes of our history are kind of like an action potential where at some lower levels of a stimulus, you see a corresponding increase in the effect. But after some threshold level, you just see an explosion where there's a massive effect, a spike in the effect. And an example that's often used in human evolution is bipedalism. So, and this was an idea that was first shared to me by someone here at Harvard, Andrew Barry, one of the last times I was here speaking. And the idea is that once you are walking only on 2 feet, you have freed up your hands. They no longer have to bear your weight. They can evolve more dexterity and agility, and they're able to do a lot of different things, such as grab your food. And once you are grabbing your food with your forelimbs instead of your face, now you no longer have to have this prognathic structure where your jaw is sticking out and it has all these sort of blunt force sort of muscles governing it. You can have fine motor control of your mouth, which releases essentially selection on the face to do things like have language, which is, of course, enormously important for us. And of course, this didn't happen immediately like an action potential did. It took millions of years. But in some sense, bipedalism freed up our face to be able to make interesting sounds that hopefully we're making tonight. But actually, a lot of people say that bipedalism is unique to humans. It's not. I mean, if you just take a couple steps back and you look at birds who have converged with us on a number of different traits, all birds are bipedal, and they have freed their forelimbs up to do other things too. And they've done something that is just as action potentialist, which is that many birds, most birds, have modified their forelimbs to be able to jet off into the skies, which only 4 different groups of organisms have ever done in the entire history of life that we know of. The insects did it first, then there are, I think, 2 lineages of pterosaurs, and then the birds, and of course, among mammals, the bats have been able to do it. And you might see planes up there, but we did that culturally, but I'm talking about in terms of genetic evolution. And so bipedalism is one of those things where you have this incremental change, and at some point after a threshold, you get a huge effect. And the reason I'm going into that is now I want to go back into our heads. Remember, we're talking about this Martian anthropologist. What is unprecedented about the way that we think compared to all other Earth organisms? What is our highest peak in terms of a spike in the produce of our minds that came about as we gradually increased in our brain size and intelligence? And I would say that it's the big questions that we ask and the answers that we conceive for them. So my first introduction to philosophy was in high school, and a teacher told me that all Western thought was basically descended like grandchildren from these three questions of the so-called Ionian thinkers, they used to call them back in the day. Now they call them the pre-Socratic philosophers. So people before Socrates in Greece. And those three questions were, who am I, why am I here, and where am I going? But of course, no doubt these questions were asked by people way earlier than those philosophers, and it wasn't a product just of Greece. They're not just Western. Starting with the world's earliest writings, we have evidence to the present day that much of philosophy, literature, art, music has been obsessed, a lot of it, including science, fascinated by these existential, metaphysical big questions, so to speak. So today, in the modern world, we still ask these very frequently, such as, how should I and others behave? How ought things really to be in the world? Now, I know on social media, I'm talking about this as asking questions, and mostly on social media, you end up having, oops, I forgot to turn this on, sorry. I can see. Okay. Social media, you often see making pronouncements or declarations much more than you see people asking about these things, right? But I hope that we're at least at some point asking before we declare still. But anyway, even if we're mostly making declarations about these things, it still illustrates the importance of these big questions in our society today. Then we have things like, why does anything exist at all? And how did the universe get here? And even the question that was not showing anymore, but the question that we're dealing with today, which is, why are we the way we are? So our Martian anthropologist, I would say, would want to ask, after looking at all these big questions that are asked by us and nobody else, do any of them have a common thread? Do all of them have a common thread? What's going on here at a deeper level? And I would say that the answer is something like the word ultimacy. They're ultimate questions, in a sense, the things that humans have this fascination for. They're like the concept of infinity. They break our conceptual boundaries. The questions are designed to do that, and we love them precisely because they do that. That's why we like those questions. So think of that action potential again. So after millions of years of our ancestral minds being preoccupied by food, shelter, sex, self-preservation, I mean, we still have all of those things, but now on top of this, at some point, there was an explosion or a spike in our capacity to think and wonder. And it wasn't limited to those basic needs. So now we have those basic needs and desires that we think about, but we love also to ask questions that are at what I would say would be the maximum valence or magnitude that can possibly be conceived. We like to talk about things and think about things that are way too big for us. So consider two of them, which we could sum up as good and God, or our mental and cultural institutions that those things have manifested in, of morality or ethics, and then religion or spirituality. Now, these two things do have something in common. They are both about ideals, or what you might call like super realities. So the good or the right is about the best possible human being. We have this idea of what the ideal human action or being, or the world that we humans inhabit, the human world. And then God is the ultimate or ideal being, something or someone that transcends everything else. So our Martian anthropologist, in reporting back to the home planet, would basically say that maybe one of, if not the most interesting thing about humans is that we're remarkably idealistic in the sense of being interested in ideals or ultimates, in what could be or should be, rather than just the world that we have present to us. We shoot for the moon. We yearn for, or at least wonder about, something transcendent, something bigger than all of us. And that might be the most wonderful thing about us. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that anything transcendent or ultimate actually exists, of course, whether goodness or God or anything else. And I don't think that science reveals anything in this realm where we can even talk about it. But speaking as that Martian anthropologist, which I'm always trying to, it's like my secondary personality, also coincidentally named David Lahti. But I think that yearning, that search for something transcendent makes humans immensely more interesting than if we didn't have that. And perhaps it's makes us the most interesting species on our little planet.